expect it to be like cold and gray outside. We're just finding ourselves here gathered with warm sunshine outside, and I can't be more pleased. It's beautiful, and it's beautiful to see you all here. You know, the light across this landscape feels almost symbolic. Even in seasons that seem dark, there can be warmth and renewal. And I just want to emphasize that about Kevin's talk that he's going to be giving. So my name is Margaret Salazar-Porzio. Please call me Margie. I'm the new executive director here at Oatlands, and I want to begin by saying how deeply grateful we are that you're all here on this beautiful afternoon to share this moment together. Historic places like Oatlands matter most when they bring people together, not simply to admire beauty, but to reckon honestly with the past and to build a more thoughtful future. Your presence here signals how much this work matters. It's an extraordinary honor to welcome Kevin Grigsby here to Oatlands. Kevin is both an author and a steward of family history. He carries forward important stories that resonate beyond one family, and he presents them with passion. His work reminds us that history is not abstract, it is lived, it is inherited, it is carried forward generation to generation. And to have him here, sharing his new book and his family's journey with us is a profound gift. Oatlands was established in 1798 as a plantation and a site of enslavement. The beauty of this landscape is inseparable from the lives, the labor, the skill, the resilience, the humanity of the men, women, and children who were held in bondage here. For generations, their stories were told incompletely, or not at all. But today, we're fortunate to be building on a strong tradition of descendant engagement at Oatlands, stewarded with care over many years, especially through the Reclaim Your Story initiative, led by Lori and others who have worked diligently to create space for research, reconnection, and truth-telling. Our commitment to honoring the ancestors is not symbolic. It is active. We host a Descendants Day every fall to create space for connection and reflection. We elevate Black history throughout the year in our tours and public programs, not just this month. We have taught thousands of students this history. We are developing policies for ethical property use so that this land is stewarded with integrity and respect. We are recording oral history so that living memory stands alongside the archival record. And we are featuring artwork, including the powerful work by Gertrude Evans, which you saw outside in the entry lobby today. And we are working to ensure that every tour, every sign, every program includes the full history of this site. So this afternoon, we invite you to settle in and enjoy the program. Support Kevin by purchasing his book, which is a groundbreaking contribution to the field of American history. And we also invite you into partnership. We welcome your insights, we welcome your challenges, we welcome your guidance. If Oatlands is to be a place of integrity, it has to be shaped in conversation with the people whose families and histories are connected to this land. Thank you for being here and for sharing this life-filled day with us. Now it's especially fitting for Lori, who has stewarded so much of Oatlands' descendant engagement and history, to come up and acknowledge the land and introduce Kevin more fully. Lori, want to take it away? Thank you.
Hi everybody, I'm Lori Kimball, Senior Manager of Programs here at Oatlands. And I join Margie and all of us here at Oatlands in welcoming you to our Black History Month program today. As Margie mentioned, we are a site of the National Trust for Historic Preservation. The property has been owned by the National Trust since the Eustace family donated it in 1965. And Oatlands is on the unceded ancestral lands of Piscataway and the Manahoic and other nations whose history we really don't know very much about, but we are in the process of learning about that, and we are committed to doing that. Oatlands is a site of enslavement and trauma, and had the dubious distinction of being the largest plantation in Loudoun County in both enslaved labor and in land. And our mission today is to recognize and honor these people who came before us and to tell a full and accurate story about that history. And so we hope you will come back in April when we reopen again for the season, and you can take a tour, you can walk the property and read the signs, and you can learn so much more about that history. And I am truly, truly honored to introduce today's speaker, Kevin Grigsby. He grew up in Loudoun and came back after graduating from Delaware State University and the University of Maryland to start his career and raise his family. He is passionate about Loudoun's history, and especially his family's history, and he is passionate about sharing it. He has spent many years researching and documenting his family's roots in Loudoun County, which culminated in his first book about Howardsville, the community that his ancestors, Sophia and Jacob Howard, who were enslaved here at Oatlands, founded with others after the Civil War. He can trace his family's roots back to at least the 1700s, and he has delved deeply into the family story we are going to hear about today, the Proctor families of Loudoun and Fauquier counties. And so just a quick statement about the format for today. What we're going to do is Kevin is going to speak. We're not going to entertain questions and comments during the presentation. What we'd like you to do is hold your questions and comments until the Q&A at the end. We're going to allow plenty of time for Q&A. And then Kevin, of course, will be here after the program is over. So with that, I would like to invite Kevin to come on up, and please join me in a warm welcome.
Good afternoon, everybody. I appreciate everybody coming out today for us to experience and enjoy this day together. Will admit I was somewhat cool, calm, and collective until the steady stream of a lot of friends, family, co-workers. I got to the point where I had to pinch myself and make sure this wasn't my wake. But it was such a beautiful day outside. I was like, no, Kevin, I think you are still amongst the living. But it truly is an honor, to feel so supported, and also to be able to have this story embraced by so many descendants. So first, let me just thank the Oatland staff for hosting this program, also for helping change the narrative. I mean, for a lot of us who have roots in Loudoun County, we know many years ago, probably not as recent as maybe 25 years ago, Oatlands was more a place where it told the story of the lost cause. It was more of a place reminiscent of telling the story of Gone with the Wind. And it didn't tell the story of those who toiled in bondage here, those who for many of us, we stand on their shoulders. So Lori, in particular, when she came on board some years ago, she worked diligently to change that narrative. So I'm very appreciative to the Oatland staff. Also appreciative, my parents are here today, just for the role that they played in helping get me here. Mom, Dad, just give a little wave. And also the descendants, because I was the one who had the privilege to tell your family's story. And I think that's what made this probably the most of the 2 books I've written, and the 4th one that's hopefully will be out next year. This is the one where I felt the most nervous, the one where I kind of struggled the most because I'm telling someone else's story. So for the descendants, if you wouldn't mind, if you would just kind of stand, if you're a descendant of the Proctors, including Margaret Johnson, who married into the Proctor family, just please just stand up if you are a descendant. I'm just waiting for some more descendants to stand. And the reason why that's important, and I also hope afterwards, even if you do have that opportunity, just to connect and just ask how, I saw that you stood up, how are you connected? Because anytime we have descendants of the ancestors who have that opportunity to reconnect, I think it is a joyous occasion. We've talked a little bit about Oatlands, the fact that you have descendants of someone named Hebe Fox who married into the Proctor family, and she had been enslaved here. Her mother had been enslaved here. Her grandmother had been enslaved here. Her mother died here. Her and her sister, a younger Hannah, they were raised by their grandmother, who was also named Hannah. And the fact that I know that there are Fox descendants here today, is definitely a wonderful occasion in which I do believe the ancestors rejoice. So so one of the challenges with doing a book talk, and you would think I would have this down by now, but I don't, is how to give like a 45-minute talk when your book is like a little over 400 pages. I was like, that's a lot of history. So to try to condense it, so I thought, what's something that maybe I could share, some type of takeaway that maybe gives you some additional insight into the book. So I thought I'll try to address these few areas. Firstly, who were the Proctors? The barriers and the challenges that I experienced when writing the book, some of the lessons I learned, and then why the story of the Proctors is a very important family, very important story, even more than ever today. And as Lori mentioned, we'll do some Q&A. I personally don't feel like I'm truly qualified in some ways, sometimes to take on some of these history tasks. I'm just a simple country guy. I love history. I have a passion for history. That's probably my best qualification. But other than that, I would say being this woman's grandson probably makes me the most qualified. This is my grandmother, Alice, at the bottom there. I was maybe like about 14, and my little sister was maybe around 3. And the reason why I say, she kind of gave me the degree to be able to take this on is my grandmother never shooed me away. Some people, unfortunately, this is something that I would hear a lot about when doing interviews. People of a certain generation, unfortunately, sometimes the older generations didn't always share stories, and they had their reasons. Some of it was maybe to spare feelings, to kind of shield the younger generation from some of the pain. But we know that we want to know the story, and many times when interviewing people, there would be that kind of regret that the older generation had never passed on these stories. But people still found a way to get some of those stories. It was kind of creative with some eavesdropping and things like that. But my grandmother never shooed me away. It was like a history lesson every time her and her brother, Bishop Jr., her sisters, especially my Aunt Mary, her sister, her cousins, especially her cousin Ruth, whenever they would come to my grandmother's house, I would be there. I didn't even need the TV turned on. I just sat there and just listened to everything that would be said. And so many times when it was just my grandmother and myself, I asked her so many questions. I mean, just nonstop. Boom, 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 boom. Ask her questions. And I always knew when her patience was beginning to run to the end, because her hand would go to her head and her eyes would close. I was like, Kevin, you're making my head hurt, It's but she just in that right there, the fact that she let me ask her so many questions, that gave me such a passion to want to know more and more and more, and also to want to be able to share that passion with others. So I am always deeply grateful, to her. So when it comes to writing a book, it truly takes a village. That has been the case with every book I've written, and especially with this one. In many ways, I kind of feel like I'm the scribe, telling these stories that others, have shared with me. Unfortunately, some of these folks have, passed on. Some of them are actually here today, and that's another reason why I felt a lot of pressure, because in many ways, if I had to tell you where this story started, was when I was doing research for my Howardsville book. And there was always, every time I read in a book, I would always hear these other stories where I was like, wow, I need to tell that story. Wow, that could become a book, but I couldn't fit it quite in the book I was writing on. So back in 2006, when I was interviewing my cousin Shirley Richardson, who was right there on the right side, and she tells me this amazing story of her ancestor who had been a nurse in the Civil War and just led this remarkable life. And I was like, wow, I have to tell that story. Cousin Shirley is a spry 90 years old. And I had this talk today, but I'm going to be doing another talk in June in Middleburg, and she lives very, very close there. So I was like, I'll tell Cousin Shirley about that talk, so she won't have to drive as far. Let me tell you today, don't you ever underestimate a spry 90-year-old. So Cousin Shirley, would you mind just standing up right So if it wasn't, for her telling that story, I learned something a long time ago. Before you can write a story, the story has to be told. And she told me that first story about Harriet Proctor, and that led to just this network of reaching out to so many other people. Mike Parker, you were here today, put your hand up. Mike, yeah, there. Nan Lewis, you are here. Yeah. Unfortunately, again, some of the folks have passed away. Miss Edith Fox Brown, she was 106 when she passed away, and when I interviewed her, she was like in her early 90s. She was kind of, she was up there in age, and the mind was just as sharp. And I truly feel privileged to have interviewed someone like this, because think about it. When 106, the knowledge that you have, the history that you have, the people in here who some of the descendants are calling ancestors, they weren't that far for her. That was like grandparents for her, and she remembered all of that, and to be able for her to interpret. So that's why it's hard for me sometimes to take like a lot of credit when doing a book, because if people didn't share their stories, there would be no book. I also want to acknowledge, you talk about, again, this ramping up pressure that came. There was also some folks who were descendant from the Proctors who flew all the way from California to come and hear this talk. When I heard that, I was like, oh, I'm done. Why these people want to come fly all the way? But they came. My fiance talked to me. She was like, do not discourage them from coming. They want to come, let them come. So the fact that you all came, and you came all this way, I'm very grateful. So just these folks, right? These three pictures really are very meaningful. Tia Nordine, Proctor descendant, Carol Tracy, Proctor descendant, and Heather Proctor. They, like many descendants, every person who provided a picture was like so meaningful. But these three, also really, really helped me kind of go back even further. But what I think is so powerful when you talk to descendants, talk to people in the present day, is remembering that what I found so moving was they were my bridge to people who have long since passed away. So for Tia, she was the bridge to her great-grandmother who was born in the late 1850s. You know, Carol, was the bridge to, I believe, an ancestor, maybe his great-grandmother. When I get past great, so I know this is being recorded, you may find that, Kevin, that was great, and you said great. So, his ancestor, Harriet Proctor, was born in the late 1820s, and Heather, whose great-grandfather was born in around 1860. I know since so many people are here, you guys can fact check me, on those things. So that's another reason why, when you spend so much time writing about these families, I've been working on the Proctor family for nearly 20 years. So also please excuse me if there are times where when I'm talking about them, if it's like I'm talking about my own family, it's like, Kevin, you're not descended from them. When you spend that much time, you do form this powerful connection to them where they do feel like your family. So where I'll kind of start a bit in terms of where this story of the Proctors begins. It begins with Levi and Hannah Proctor. Levi was a free person of color who was born around 1797. His future wife, Hannah, was born in around 1801, and Hannah was enslaved by the Rector family. Some of us in this area, Rectortown was named for them. But where this story was so compelling was, we will hear how, that point in time of the intersection of European ancestry and African ancestry. But this was a time where I saw it. I saw it in terms of seeing when the Proctors' European ancestors through Hannah, when they first came to this country. And they came over in 1714 as indentured servants for a period of around 4 years. And they were indentured to this British aristocrat, Governor Alexander Spotswood. And they worked at a place called Fort Germana, and they engaged in all sorts of labor. It was 42 individuals from 14 families, and they are believed to have been, the first German immigrants who arrived in Virginia in mass. And while they were there, they also toiled alongside enslaved Africans. This was a time where indigenous Americans were still desperately trying to hold on to Virginia. This was, again, you think about it, 1714, we're still quite a ways away from the Revolutionary War. Within a short period of time, within one generation, these 14 families, there's indentured servitude ends, they then are able to become landowners, and the other side of Hannah's family was through her mother, who I believe it could have been around this time because she was born around maybe 1770s. She very likely could have been, the daughter, the granddaughter of captured Africans who were forced into enslavement. So we're looking at a period of maybe four generations where these families intersect, and you have this daughter who is now descended from both these indentured servants and tragically enslaved Africans. I thought it was very fascinating when researching how those first families who came over, who were devout, they were very devout in their faith. They had experienced religious persecution in their homeland in Germany. It took them years. It wasn't a simple feat of just getting on a ship, we're going to sign up for indentured servitude for, 4 years, you say? No, there was a lot that went into that. They had to make it from the region that they were from. They had to travel a great distance. And there were like young children that were even on that ship. It was no easy feat. When writing this book, because these people weren't around for me to interview them, it's just a lot of theories and questions that I posed. I thought it was very fascinating that those first Germana immigrants, many of them, to date, I haven't found any records of them owning other human beings. It was the next generation that started understanding that part of wealth and prosperity in the American South would be tied to slavery. But that first generation did not. And I sometimes wonder, was it because they knew persecution themselves? Was it because of seeing what enslaved Africans endured while they knew it? Eventually our time is going to end, and these poor souls are going to still be suffering. Maybe that was the reason why they did not partake. But that next generation, and just please forgive me, I did not take German in school. I can speak enough Spanish to get myself to point A to point B, and sometimes offend people, but I did not speak German. So so please forgive me. Some of my pronunciations are wrong. But that first generation, when they came, you look at, these were among, and the thing that I want to say about Hannah is, because those 14 families were so close-knit, Hannah, and if you are a Proctor descendant, if you are a descendant of Hannah Proctor, you are essentially descended from all of those 14 families. But that first generation, these are the spellings of some of their names. Kuntz eventually became Kunz. Heit became Hit. Otterbach became Utterback. Rechter became Rector. Weaver became Weaver. I tried, y'all know where I'm going. I tried, but when I was practicing last night, I couldn't get it right. And because this was going to be recorded, and because I work in a high school.
Try Fuchs. Fuchs.
Wow, thank you. One more time for the audience. Can you say that again?
Fuchs.
Okay, that was not what I was saying last night. I was practicing. Thank you. Thank you. I love this. That is amazing. So it became Fox, you know? And I do think it's worth just thinking about, you know, what was given up, that when they became, quote unquote, Americanized, that they then began to dabble into something that was very much a stain on our family's history, which was slavery. But to be a Proctor, to be a descendant, was your ancestry is still tied to both, because so many times as African Americans, I will say, when we do think of our European ancestry, we think of when everyone at that point, you know, is now here in America. And we often know many African Americans are descended from, you know, an enslaved black woman and often a white male, whether it was a slave master, whether it was an overseer, whether it was a family member of the slave master. And Hannah Proctor, her mother was an enslaved woman owned by first the Hit family, and then when someone passed away, her original master, she was then willed to the daughter, which is actually kind of a tragic story of trickery. She was actually freed according to the will, but I believe that she was never told. And she continued to be enslaved, because I tried to figure out, well, why is she being freed again when she was freed earlier? But if you cannot That's why education, that's why the power to read and write was something that had to be forbidden, because with that came knowledge, with that came power. So her enslavement continued. I mean, at that point, if she had been freed when first instructed, I mean, she was still a teenager at that point. But she continued for at least another 20, 30, 40 years in slavery. And the father of her daughter was the son of the slave master. The circumstances of that birth, I don't know. And there was, again, you could speculate all day long. But the thing that made this story so much different that I hadn't encountered before in my research was what happened after Hannah's birth. We get to a point where the slave master, Elizabeth Rector, dies, and in her will, maybe through a moment of consciousness or wanting to rectify past transgressions, she frees Hannah's mother, Milla, for a second time. Then she frees Hannah, her granddaughter, and then she frees all of Hannah's children. And she had a lot of children. And what happened was something that was probably on par with a modern day Dallas or Young and the Restless in terms of the family drama. That's another thing I can credit my grandmother for, was being very sophisticated with keeping up with the stories. Because you had roots in Loudoun County, especially in the West, you got like 3 channels, 4 sometimes. On a windy day, you might be down to 1 or 2. So I was very up to date on all things stories, related. But what happened within the Rector family was Joseph Rector, Hannah's father, his siblings had a fit. They were like, "You manipulated Mama. Mama didn't write that will like that. We know that that's you." Now, I'm paraphrasing a bit, taking some liberties here. And they took him to court. It was like, no, those children should still be enslaved. Again, I don't know the circumstances of how Hannah was conceived, but her father went to court. And he battled for 10 years to make sure that his daughter and grandchildren were not put back in slavery. He lost his relationship with his siblings. He lost much of his wealth. And he lost a lot of his social standing. But in the end, his daughter, his grandchildren, they were free. And then after that, Hannah and Levi, they had more children who were born into freedom. And that was a very compelling story. So some of the lessons that I learned, with just writing this book was a few of these things I'll just touch on is, what about our European ancestors before the Middle Passage? The concept of racial identity and passing. The book could have had a different title. And I also get to have my own cool cemetery story. So I want to share with you, it's a little unorthodox. Like I said, I don't consider myself this professional in this area. I'm just someone who's just super passionate about this. So I kind of want to share this moment that I had by myself with all of you of when I was watching one of my favorite, stories about finding your roots. And when I'm watching this, and I'm like, what? That's the family I'm researching. So anyway, I want us to kind of enjoy this together. This is just like 3.5 minutes. Glasses on.
Really? Yes. That's awesome. That's why I like magic. Neil Patrick Harris is not only one of America's most celebrated actors, he's also a talented magician.
And deep in his family tree, we found an ancestor who may well have shared those talents, albeit under very different circumstances. The story begins in 16th century Germany, where court records show that Neil's 12th great-grandmother, a woman named Gertrude, or Trude, found herself in a great deal of trouble.
Trude wanted to do the same to the calf as she had done to the little piglets, which now will no longer eat grass. That she laid her 2 calves in a hole which she had set ablaze.
Do you have any idea what they are accusing your ancestor Gertrude of?
Making some delicious meal? Delicious Hawaiian meal.
Your 12th great-grandmother was on trial for her life for witchcraft.
Wow. Wow.
Gertrude's trial began in October of 1588, more than 100 years before the Salem witch trials in colonial New England. All told, the case resulted in nearly 200 pages of testimony, and its outcome was shocking.
Already in 1590, Gertrude, the wife of Hans Stuhl in Clawfield, who came from Alken, was burnt on the stake as a witch. Wow. She is supposed to have bewitched the pigs and cows of her neighbors so that they died. The cattle had foam on their necks. One cow lost her hooves, and the pigs had breathed like a bellows.
Did you ever in your wildest dream think that you descended from a witch?
I love the magic, so I think that's fantastic. I wonder what the actual story of that is. If there was an angry neighbor that was upset that animals were dying randomly from
Hoof and mouth disease.
Hoof and mouth disease.
Those are all the symptoms of hoof and mouth disease.
blamed it on the neighbor.
Today, what we call hoof and mouth disease is commonly recognized as a highly contagious disease among farm animals. But in the 16th century, it wiped out livestock for reasons that no one understood. And so it inspired widespread panic. For all we know, Gertrude may have been killing sick animals to prevent an epidemic from spreading, only to be blamed for practicing witchcraft. In 10 years of tracing genealogies, we never had a witch on anyone's family tree.
I feel like she wasn't really a witch, and that there was a miscommunication, and this angry man whose animals were going blamed it on her. But I would like to think that she really was a witch. She had magical powers. We lost one for the cause. But the witchcraft lives on.
Thank you all very much for indulging me with watching that video. It was one of the reasons why I found that. Let me back up. A lot of times, and if you read this book, you will sometimes see that I start someplace in a chapter in terms of posing questions, and then I end up someplace very different, because it's like, I'm kind of discovering these things as I'm going along, and I thought for it to be a more authentic experience is to let people see that as well. And where hearing that story took me, because if you are descended from the Proctors, that story of Gertrude is also yours. And it was really, for the first time in my life, where I did think about this. What about our European ancestors before the Middle Passage, where we look out beyond the slave master, the rapist overseer? And when I thought about Gertrude, and everything that they said about her, imagine, and again, I theorize, while she was on that stake, after having been in prison for a year away from her toddler child. What she must have thought if she got a glimpse into the future of her descendants who become enslavers and her descendants who suffer persecution. I truly believe that her heart would have gone out to those who suffered persecution as well. Never mind the color of their skin, because they are still her descendants. And I was like, that for me was actually a profound experience, because Gertrude didn't own no slaves. She didn't participate in that, but yet she is still the descendant of proctors today. And it also was very mind-blowing of realizing that how many, mostly women, had been accused of witchcraft in Europe. Again, the tragedy of the Salem witch trials was tragic. Nearly 100 people, women lost their lives. But tens of thousands of mostly women throughout Europe were being accused of witchcraft, because supposedly women were more easily under the sway of wickedness, but yet all these men were being conquistadors, raping and pillaging in South America, and going on crusades and stuff, but yet somehow women. So it's very interesting when you hear narratives being spun way back then, and when we think about narratives being spun today. I also discovered, and again, I started out using the term passing at the beginning of a chapter where I write about this, and where I ended up with someplace very different, where I thought about what is one's racial identity. And these were just some of the, Proctor descendants. Thomas Inbourne, who became, an amazing educator, founded some schools down in North Carolina. Waynfield Fox, the patriarch of Fox family. Samuel Wilman Proctor, who had, a very, large family. And what I discovered was this whole thing about race was it depended upon where you were. Because if you stayed in Virginia, and if you had blue eyes, blonde hair, you were still called black. If someone knew of your ancestry, but when you went maybe to the north, it's like, well, you look white. And growing up, we always thought passing, was like this betrayal of one's race. You're turning your back on, on your people. And then as I'm writing, I'm kind of thinking about what it really meant. It was like they were European as well. They did have European features. They chose, today in 2026, people will identify, I'm biracial, I'm multiracial. But at that time, they didn't. And I realized I was still kind of trapped in that thinking of, oh yeah, when they went, they were passing. No, they chose to identify with how they look. But more importantly, what I also had to think about is these people had families, and they knew the hell that their family was catching back in Virginia. They knew the second-class citizenship that they were facing back in Virginia. And now they're starting a family of their own. As a parent, you inherently want to protect your children. And realizing that, and I said, as I'm writing this book, I was like, I know I started using the term passing at the beginning, but I'm no longer using it now. Now the term I'm using is what they chose to identify with. Another thing that I kind of learned when writing this is this book could have, instead of a story of hope and freedom, the Proctors of Loudoun and Fauquier counties, Virginia, it could have been called A Story of Resilient and Strong Women, the women of the Proctor family from Loudoun and Fauquier counties. It hit me at some point just like a collision, where I'm writing, I was like, wow, there is a lot. Every single line of these families was these remarkably strong, resilient women who endured and overcame, and then at the same time had to help raise the next generation of children or grandchildren. And I just thought that that was just, just simply amazing. I think Gail and Mary, are you all here? Yeah. Yeah. And why I thought, again, it's so cool having this picture too, is, Hebe and her sister Hannah, and I mentioned they had been enslaved here. And Gail is a descendant of Hebe, and Mary is a descendant of her sister. And, and as time, even though they both remained in Loudoun County, within a couple of generations, their line has kind of lost contact. So for them to kind of to reunite was very powerful. This was actually at our Descendants Day last year. And even for Hannah's grandmother who raised her, just knowing that her descendants are back here today, who have achieved things in their profession, who have achieved things in their lives, where they have become their own strong women. That was like, again, a moment where I truly believe that the ancestors, rejoiced at such a powerful experience. This letter here, again, another example of someone who I believe was a strong woman. Her name was Sally Fox. So she was Waynfield Fox. Waynfield's father, his name was Alfred Fox. And I couldn't quite figure out for certain who Alfred's father was. I know his mother was Margaret, and they were, a white family. And this was out in Upperville, so we hear the story of like the Loving family. I think it was Richard and Mildred, and their legacy. But going back to 1850s, late 1850s, Alfred and Carolyn Proctor, they were basically married, maybe not legally. And it wasn't a case where Alfred had his white family, then he had his side black family. They lived together as husband and wife. On records, they had to put, he was, head of household and she was like a servant. But, they and the children never had his name on their birth records. But in death, then they started putting who their father was, or on marriage records, they put who their father was. And Alfred's sister, she owned the land, and some of this land is still in their descendants today. In 1868, Sally wrote this will, where she gave the children of her brother, and from those of you from the area, you'll recognize these names, Spinney, of course Fox, Sanford. Those were the last names of her two nieces and then her nephew. And in 1868, this woman, she didn't play. She was like, you know what? I don't care. I'm going to go down to this Fauquier County courthouse. I'm going to file this will. And if anyone said anything, wait, your brother's with wait, how? No, this woman did not care. She put this down at a time where this was illegal. Again, these stories of these just courageous women. And she left this land to her niece, her biracial nephew, and her two nieces. And the fact that because this woman was willing to be like, you know what, I don't care, I'm going to do what I'm going to do, that their descendants still own this land today, which is, again, another of just many, many powerful testimonies of courageous and strong women throughout this book. Another thing that I got to have to write this book was I got to have my own cool cemetery story. And you wonder where I'm going with this. So when I wrote my second book, my cousin Vernon, who's an amazing historian, who was actually kind of the catalyst for my second book about Loudoun natives who fought in the Civil War, and that's where I talked about Harriet Proctor, who had been a nurse, and she nursed both wounded Confederate and Union soldiers. And Vernon told me this story, and he had been the longtime caretaker of our ancestral cemetery. Now, I'm going to age myself a little bit, and I'm going to use a bit of a southern phrases. You can believe what you want, but this is what was told to me. Vernon told me this story that he was walking by this one grave of a Union soldier. Vernon had never paid much attention to this particular grave. You know? And then one day he said, it was like something grabbed me by the leg of my pants. Vernon was a sharp, brilliant man. So I'm not telling you some wild, made-up story. He said it truly felt like something had pulled him by the leg. And then he looked at this headstone, and for the first time in decades, he really took note of what this said. And it had this inscription, USCI, and he didn't know what that meant. And Vernon had been a proud, Army veteran. He had served in the Korean War. So he went on his own investigation before Google, before Ancestry.com and everything else. And he discovers that meant U.S. colored infantry. And then he tells me this story. And he had gone to every African-American cemetery in the county and took pictures that had the same marker of this man, Dennis Weaver. And then that led to my second book. I was always like, that's a cool story. Like, as much as I tell, write these books and stuff, I was like, I didn't have a cool cemetery story yet. But writing this book finally gave me my cool cemetery story. So Olivia is my amazing fiance, could not be here today. She's traveling in her home country of Mexico. And we visited the Rectortown Cemetery. This was the site of many of the early Rector family members, including one of the 42 individuals who were among those first group of German immigrants who established the little settlement of Germana. And one of them was Hans Jacob Richter. Now you notice, his son, that when he became John Rector. And then his son became, there was no more Hans Jacob, it became John. They did own slaves, Hans didn't. Just worth pointing out. And I wanted to find that. I was like, how amazing is that? To find a picture and be able to put in my book for descendants to see an ancestor who was born in the 1600s. And we went through that gate, searched all around. There wasn't a lot of graves, and I could not find it. And I was kind of bummed out. I was like, man, it said that he was buried here. So then I'm walking back, Olivia and I, and that's why I wish she was here, so you all would know that I have a witness to this story. Y'all gonna be questioned, like, that didn't happen. Kevin just telling that, we're just talking about it. He was just buying the book. So Olivia and I, we walked through the gate. You see the tree right there in the middle. We walked through that tree in the middle, and then the other tree. And then we're walking back, and I'm a little bummed. I was like, man, I really thought that it was here. It said it was here. Why couldn't I find it? Cool cemetery story. It was like, not a big gush of wind, but just a little whoosh. Just a little whoosh. Just enough to make me look back. And then when I looked back, right next to that tree, I see these 3 graves. I'm like, where were those graves at when I first walked by? Because I must have walked by it and did not see it. So my cool cemetery story is, I believe that Hans was like, hey, where you going? You just drove all the way out here and you about to go? Send a little something your way. It might have been that little whoosh that I heard. So the Proctor writing this book gave me, finally, my cool cemetery story. So some of the barriers and challenges that I faced when writing this book was, I was 90% done with this book in 2015. And my computer crashed, and I went back to having 75%. And you may not sound like a lot, but I had asked a lot of descendants for pictures, and I lost so much, and I was devastated. And for about 6 or 7 years, I didn't touch the book again. And funny how things work. I ended up catching, the first of 2 times, I caught COVID. And I think it was at the time when we're still supposed to, give yourself, I don't know, however much time to not to go back to work. So I started kind of coming out of the fog, and then I was like, you know what? I think I might work on that book. Home for like another week. And it came back, to me. And I also had to humble myself and reach back out to some descendants. And I was so ashamed. I was like, I am so sorry. I know you haven't heard from me for a while. I'm starting back up with the book. Would you mind sending these pictures to me again? And graciously, they did. Also writing short stories. This was something I had never done before. So these stories, especially some of these love stories, these stories of these amazing women, I was like, I wanted to challenge myself to write dialogue on some pages. And so Elizabeth Carter was the master here at Owens, the enslaver. She kept this running diary, which for many of the descendants of the enslaved, it was a genealogical gold mine for us. But just the most simple thing where in 1865, what's this? Let's see. Okay, June 10th, 1865, Elizabeth Carter writes, "Old Hannah, very insolent to me." And I write, this was not long after the Civil War, and I talk about, I reflect on, Hannah is standing up for herself, because no other time in this diary was Hannah ever referred to as old Hannah. So I was like, Elizabeth was like mad at her. She's calling her old Hannah, very insolent to me. And I was like, I need dialogue with that. I was like, how much different that might kind of help with this story. So I kind of imagine what their conversation might have been like. So this is what I write. I imagine the following conversation occurred at the end of a long workday on that day on June 10, 1865, when Carter tells Hannah, you still have laundry to finish, Hannah. Hannah politely replies, Mrs. Carter, it's already 10 minutes past 5 o'clock, and my workday ended 10 minutes ago. I've got to get home and prepare dinner for my family, because now, two months after Lee has surrendered to Grant, Hannah is now a free woman. So Carter, increasing the sternness in her voice, excuse me, Hannah, need I remind you that you don't leave until the work of the day is finished? For a moment, almost instinctively, Hannah starts to finish the laundry. Then the reminder that she is now a free woman snatches hold of her, recalling all the days when the choice to leave was not an option. And with a sharp tone that Carter had never heard before, Hannah declares, need I remind you, Mrs. Carter, that you don't own me or my family anymore? I've been here all day working hard, as I always do, and now it's time for me to go home and tend to my family. If you want the laundry finished, I suggest you do it yourself. Carter stands there speechless, stammering, searching for the words to say as she watches the door close behind Hannah. And she immediately goes to the parlor, takes a pen and writes down, June 10th, 1865, old Hannah, very insolent to me. So I really felt like, as a social worker, validation is a core part of my profession. And you all just gave me amazing validation. Oh my God. Thank you guys for that. And then the other thing that I would say was a challenge when writing this book was so much emotional pain. It's like, even though these are things a long time ago, like you're writing, you're rereading it, you're revising it, and it takes a toll after a while, especially these chapters 11 through 14, where I follow the line of Samuel Proctor, who was the son of Levi and Hannah, and how he died tragically in a farming accident, leaving behind a widow and children that were like stair steps, 15, 11, 7, 5, I mean, all the way down to like a 1-month-old. And how tragic that was. And then his son, an amazing, another one of these stories that kind of warranted its own book, Clarence Proctor, Samuel's son, becomes part of one of the famed Buffalo Soldiers. And he dies tragically around the turn of the century after serving his country. We talk about red tape today. I actually didn't realize red tape existed in the 1890s. After coming back and contracting a horrible illness, fighting in the Spanish-American War, and he's waiting to get his pension. Desperately, he's clinging on to life, hoping for this pension to come. I've served my country. And he's waiting months and months and months, pleading to the government, I really need this pension. I really need help. And finally, when his body has all but withered, he stands in a chair, puts a rope around some rafters, and he hangs himself. And that very day, the pension check came in the mail. It was amazing. We talk about kind of trying to get to a place of increased mental health awareness today, but to see what occurred after his death, and he was living in Arizona, and this was so moving because it wasn't about black or white. Someone from a high-ranking person in the Rough Riders, which Teddy Roosevelt kind of gave fame to, sent out in an article talking about their brother, Clarence, had died. One of our own. And I'm calling everyone, all the Rough Riders, everyone if you serve, please come out and let's send him home honorably. I was like, wow, 1900s? Like, they said this? I was like, wow. A young girl, Marie Martin, was tragically killed by a deranged ex-boyfriend when she was 19. Writing that, it was so painful. Another brother, Lemuel, tragically, he had one child who tragically died at a couple months old, and he and his wife didn't have any further children. Their brother, Sam, died tragically, leaving. This is when his children were still pretty young. He had at least another child after this, but he leaves, leaving behind a widow with a large family. There were times, y'all, I had to step away. I was like, this is too much. Now, I'm a very sensitive soul, and I blame my daughter because something happened when this child came into the world, and I held her. My tear ducts have never been the same. It's like, and then her brother came 3 years later. It's Karen Elijah, and then the same thing. They said, Grigsby, it's a boy. After that, I cry so much in movies. I mean, I watched The Lion King 12 times before my kids were born. After they came into I'm watching, I can still remember it. I'm watching The Lion King. Mufasa. I watched the movie, I'm like, why am I crying now? My children. So, again, I cried very easily. And there were times where I just had to step away. But then with that, every picture, especially that line of Samuel and his wife Margaret, I mean, you talk about a bad woman. I mean, this woman was tough. After she lost her husband, and while they were married, the Union troops, which is why the story of the Proctors is such a fascinating story. Harriet has children by a Confederate soldier who ends up leaving her land. The brother, Thomas, fights in the famed 5th Massachusetts Cavalry. Their brother, Samuel, and his wife, Margaret, have their home, their farm, raided twice by Union troops. They take everything. Margaret, for almost 40 years, she battles the U.S. government. This woman battles the U.S. government, takes it to the highest level of the court, that I want compensation. You will do right by me. And they eventually do pay her. It wasn't what she asked for, but just the courage. So when I got a chance to see pictures of that line, of them smiling, this picture of Sam, his, you guys correct me if I get it wrong, this was Edgar right here, right? And Roman was born after this picture. To see them getting to become old men, something that their father and their grandfather and their uncle and even a brother did not get to do. I will tell y'all right now. Cry! I have no shame in admitting that. Seeing a granddaughter standing with her daughter at a proud moment, seeing, yes, there was all this tragedy, but there was still triumphs. And a big thanks to Heather and Tia, because at the very end of this journey, I don't know why I didn't have it at the beginning, I panicked. The book was done. And I was like, oh crap, this isn't my family story. What if they don't like it? What if they don't approve? It was a little too late by this point. I mean, I already told Opens I was going to do a book talk in like 3 months. Yeah, I didn't tell them that. So I'm just getting this now. And I was like, would you guys mind reading this book? I know not every descendant, may necessarily approve. I just need somebody. Tell me what you think. I was so nervous waiting for them to come back. Tia she was like, I sent the book back to you. You should get it soon. And I was like, so what did you think? But I didn't. I didn't ask. I just waited there for a week, nervous. I wrote this book, but the nerves awaited. And then when she sent it back, and she put this inscription in, Kevin, you have done the family proud. And I was like, okay, I'm good. I'm good. Heather read it, was like, thank you for telling my family story. And I was like, okay, I'm good. And Tia was one of those that I had to humble myself and ask her for the pictures again. So kind of double thanks to her. In this story today, I will just say in closing, it is important because when you look at the cover of this book, you do have people who are clearly African American, clearly more European. But the story of the Proctors, despite present day, despite some families identifying as white for several generations, some identifying as black for several generations, they are all one family. When you trace back to the story of that poor soul who is practicing probably some brilliant homeopathic type of natural remedies and stuff, and it's like in the 1500s, these animals, something is up, I think I need to bury them, maybe set them on fire. Brilliant woman! Some ignorant men are like, witchcraft! And burn her alive. That is still their ancestor. The story of those first Germanic immigrants who came over and traveled hundreds and hundreds of miles throughout Europe to eventually to board upon a ship, not knowing what waited for them on the other side. That is still every Proctor descendants, that is their story. Someone who survived the Middle Passage, that is still their story. And that is something that I thought, how inspiring is not the book that I wrote, but their story. How inspiring that is for us today, more than ever, to be able to look where it's like there are differences, but they are still the Proctors. All right. So, thank you guys so much.